and I am a member of this task force, and I will pass it down to my left.
Christina Ballard. I'm on this task force and I'm a commissioner on the Human Rights Commission.
I'm Dan. I'm on the task force and a owner and founder of Neurodiversity Inclusive Solutions.
Thank you very much. Do we have any public comment, Chris? Either
Christina
written
Ballard.
or
On this task force and commissioner on the Human Rights Commission.
No public comment at this time, no.
okay, great. Thank you. And then are there any member remarks or announcements on non-agenda items? I think we anticipate having a robust conversation here later. But anything on something other than the agenda?
Sorry, what was it?
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Okay. Is it something on my end or something on yours?
On my side, after getting the YouTube streaming live going, it automatically plays.
Shall I say again what I just said?
Yeah, if you want to take it from the top again, yeah.
Okay, well, so, in case there was some technical difficulties for folks watching online, we just introduced ourselves, each of us here online and in person. I asked if there's public comment. I don't think any was received. And then I was asking members if they had any remarks or comments about non-agenda items, anticipating we're going to have quite a conversation later, but anything not on the agenda that folks wanted to talk about today. I think Dan's shaking his head. So great. Is Nicole with us tonight?
So, Nicole. Hey. Honor.
All right, great. Nicole, I really want to welcome you to this task force. I have understood that you as director of the Salem Housing Authority, has taken some interest in some of the things that we're working on, and so I just really appreciate your time tonight, and looking forward to your presentation and our conversation. So thank you for being here, Nicole, and thank you for all that you do for the city. I know it's a big job.
Thank you. So I'm Nicole. Is this one on? I'm not sure how the county's ones work. I'm Nicole Utz. I'm the director of Salem Housing Authority, and I am here tonight. I am very interested. I have watched the last task force meeting, and I have been following along with a lot of the interest. I've actually had several core contract architects, and one of my key criteria is much of what you're discussing in their expertise areas, and why Sequoia Crossings architect was chosen was hopefully to bring in a lot of the trauma-informed design into that building and make it a peaceful place for people to call home. And what I wanted to do more than anything was be here and be available to answer any questions about how we go about our design, development, and improvements. I have been discussing with Eunice Kim and I do have the list. Actually, it's a very informative list, and I have provided that to the architect firm as suggestions, and I was taking notes during the meeting. I know I watched it after the fact, but I found it very fascinating, and I'm one that can admit when we're not perfect and we can make improvements. We've continually tried to make improvements and learning based off of Redwood Crossings and design and concept from Yaquina Hall, which is a historic building, which is very challenging to get permission to make any adjustments to. We did the best that we could with the design elements of that building. And then with all we've learned from those properties, we tried to put as much as we learned into Sequoia Crossings within our budget constraints that we did have with that site. So I did do some research on some of the comments that were made, such as the smoke alarms taking up to 5 weeks. We have no open smoke alarm requests for 5 weeks. We do know that we had an issue with our smoke alarm system. Many people probably don't realize in COVID era, there was a issue with getting our electrical gear to buildings. And so the majority of the build time for that construction project was done off of a generator system. We actually had to take the power up, take the power down, take the power up during the day and back down just to complete it in a timely fashion because our electrical gear arrived shortly before we opened the building, which is how we power up those buildings. The unfortunate thing that we've learned is that the smoke alarms took a real hit from doing that. And we're not exactly sure this new era of required smoke alarm is also, we're not just seeing it in Sequoia, we're seeing it having issues throughout many other projects. They beep, they chirp, we're not sure why. They're supposed to have a 10-year lifespan. They're not ones that tenants can change the battery. They're not supposed to have to ever change the battery. We actually take the entire smoke detector down and put the smoke detector back up. So it's not the old style smoke alarms where you can actually change the battery and put them back up and get that chirping to stop. But I also wanted to assure you all that we have a 24-hour response time for emergency work orders. We also have a 24-hour maintenance line, and they do respond. And I did check. There were numerous occasions they responded to Sequoia after hours. So we do strive to make sure our tenants are not subjected to that awful chirping. We know how it is. In fact, many times we hear the chirping and we go knock on doors to see if we can get it addressed. So more than anything, I just want to be available to answer any questions. There was one other comment that I wanted to address, and I've been talking with Eunice Kim as well, is that some of the suggestions made are beyond the Salem Housing Authority's control in design. I can tell you one of the most frustrating aspects that we hear the most about is our door closures. It's also one that we get the most probably technical findings from our HUD and our funders because people remove them from doors. They are required by fire marshals to have, and so we cannot remove them. We've even gone as far as going to HUD to see if they would give us any sort of reprieve. We can power them down to a minimum of 5 pounds, but that is about what we can do to try to help offset that. But those are meant and designed to save lives. And so that is a life safety feature that we have no control over being able to make any adjustments in a design or a plan of a building. It's commonly on every complex that is designed today. We do have some of the older days where like Parkway is not grandfathered in. It doesn't have door closures on it. But anything new that we've built since about 15, 16, we've had to put door closures on it, and it has to have a rating that a minimum 5-pound pressure that is sealing that off. It's to help prevent smoke coming into the unit and give the additional time for the firefighter response. So the other comment that was made is that we have full ADA units that are not fully accessible. The entire first floor of Sequoia Crossings is not full ADA units. There are 3 fully accessible ADA units at Sequoia Crossings. The remaining ones on all of the first floor, we took the extra step to make every single one of those what's considered visitable. And we can make adaptations to them if need be for adding different items into those units to help make them more livable for our residents. I did hear comments about our reasonable accommodation process. That's unfortunately another federal regulation that we do need to follow and have a reasonable accommodation process for every single federal funded. The state of Oregon Housing and Community Services also requires that we have a reasonable accommodation process in place. We do turn those around much faster than we did in the previous days. What I am seeing is that doctors' offices are being very challenging for our residents to get that paperwork through, or even charging for that paperwork, which is extremely frustrating to us. It is especially for let's say an ESA, emergency or emotional support animal, that's not something we can visibly decide for an individual that they need, and we do need a medical professional to advise that paperwork. we would be open to hear how to make it less intrusive or easier to do. But a lot of that has to do with collaborating more with the medical field and seeing how they can help us to make that easier. I even have staff that are being charged for FMLA paperwork. That's frustrating to me. That's a law that needs to change on maybe the medical professional side, that these are required necessities for individuals to get what they need in their life as well. So with Sequoia Crossings is just one of multiple complexes that we own and manage. We do appreciate any feedback. A lot of the design of Sequoia Crossings was we actually had a panel on our design team with lived experience that helped make decisions in the design of the building in what would help people feel welcome in spaces and truly try to help make it more trauma informed, not just what a housing authority would do or what it typically would look like. If you notice, that is the one of a kind building in Salem, and we truly tried to make it one of a kind. And with the different design elements that it includes, many people don't know what the squares on the side of the building are designed to look like water coming down. A lot of the youth can get my Minecraft theory of the waterfall coming off the building, but not everybody sees that. And then there's wood, metal. We tried to incorporate a lot of the earth elements to give it a calming effect. Our windows are tinted blue to give a sky feeling and also a water feeling. We matched the tile to give that serene feel and put a little bit of art to keep it calming and refreshing. The one thing that I have done since your meeting has requested that we do a request for proposals on a door opener to the community room. We do acknowledge that that wasn't done during the initial construction, and we never quite figured that out ourselves. But that building does require the door opener at the main entrance. And then we added the one at the laundry room, but we didn't put one into the community room. So that's something that we can definitely look at and seeing where we can fund that after the fact. So I'm open to answer any questions about different designs. I also would be happy to provide any feedback from experience. The one thing that is very concerning to me is the use of key fobs or technology-driven items and units. We actually went through, we actually followed Lincoln Place in Vancouver, Washington to try to build out Redwood Crossings. And we did take some of their concepts. We have lived through that, and we've learned that high technology doors were not something that our clients could continue to maintain. We actually had about $100,000 in overtime charges for callouts, for lockouts, different scenarios. Losing a key fob is about a $75 expense to replace. We tried the hotel system. You can imagine you going to a hotel and how many times you lose your hotel key. Our residents were also losing the key that quickly. We've tried various different easier to navigate systems that ultimately we actually replaced all the doors back to a standard door key, and we have had very little call outs, and the residents have much preferred that. So that is one suggestion that I would take, is maybe seeing some of the past experiences. Tankless water heaters, we actually did a green retrofit of Inglewood East building, which is a senior complex in Northeast Salem. We had the tankless water heaters there for probably 3 years, giving them a try. Unfortunately, again, we had multiple callouts due to no hot water. It was a learning scenario of trying to get people to understand about how they run and how they work. And then what we experienced was excessively high water bills because they were continuing to run water longer to try to get it to heat up and work efficiently. We have since removed all of the tankless water heaters from that building. And our bills have gone down. We're not using as much water, which, believe it or not, to HUD is very important. Our usage of water is one of the criteria that they do monitor, and they do question why we are using various different amount of water. So we acknowledge that that was supposed to be a green energy saver for us, and it was just not successful with that clientele. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I just wanted to make myself available to hear about how we put these buildings together and the design concepts behind them. But we do have 4 core contract architects and a design team that we can pull upon. We carefully try to pick out who is working on our buildings and what their expertise levels are. And then we also try to include the lived experience in each of them so that we're not making decisions for individuals who are going to be living in the property.
Thank you, Nicole, so much for those comments. Do folks have any questions for Nicole?
Yes, this is Dan.
Yeah, go ahead, Dan, please.
So I actually did come from Salem Housing Authority. I was in the apartment units in West Salem and then eventually moved to a duplex and successfully went through the programs and obtained buying my own house. So I have been through the system myself. And one thing I just wanted to kind of touch on is you mentioned accommodations. And then with like the key fobs, with the water heaters, so forth. I know in the duplexes that I was in at one point, they did have the solar water heaters on the roof. So it was about a half or like a 2-gallon water heater in the unit. And then we had the solar water heater. I actually thought it was amazing. It seemed to work very efficiently for the 2 years that I was there. So just wanted to kind of comment on that being an option.
Sure, we actually did put, those were public housing units. And we did go after every source of funding to try to, I mean, we're always trying to find climate friendly options for our buildings. The unfortunate thing with those solar systems is we had a very difficult time finding anybody that would work on them in this local area. We had, and of course, the water heaters are a system that we need to have repaired within 24 hours. We have a requirement, turnaround, make sure that our residents have hot water. And we have struggled tremendously to get people that can work on those units themselves. They're still in many of the homes. They do require additional maintenance and cleaning and keeping up with the rooftops, but some of them have been removed where they weren't successfully showing an efficiency, because to try to replace that system over just putting a standard one back in was not cost effective for us.
And I'm very set on like the water heater usage as well, because I've actually had a roommate who had physical disabilities, and in order to assist with his symptoms, he would actually take 3 or 4 hour long showers. And he'd have just a really flare up day, and he would literally just sit in the shower for a couple hours. With having the tankless water heaters or the solar water heaters, it provided that longevity. Of course, it is going to have more water cost. However, it was a necessity for him particularly to be able to have that usage available to him.
Yeah.
So just kind of putting that out there as a need when it comes to disabilities. Sometimes that water cost has to be justified based on the person's individual needs.
Absolutely.
And then I just wanted to, I can understand the accommodation request for a service animal or a emotional support animal. I know they're not always fully trained. There's always that gray area between there. When it comes to other accommodations, like if somebody actually said, okay, yes, I would benefit from a key fob, could that be available to them without a doctor's recommendation? Or I know I was in the unit I was in, it had no carpeting whatsoever in the entire unit. It was just laminate flooring, upstairs and down, as basic as can be. And I can understand the concept of it is keeping it clean, keeping it reasonable, easy to get tenants in and out. However, the sound, the acoustics of that type of unit, I'm deaf in one ear. It did change my ability to even hear somebody across the room from me. I asked for input on that, and they basically, yeah, sure, you can buy whatever rugs or carpets you want. Just don't permanently attach anything in. I would actually see that as a combination as well when it comes to ADA. Like you said, like being more trauma informed, to where those ADA units are strictly mobility informed. If somebody does go in and they're not mobility issues, they want to be upstairs in the back corner, but they want a key fob and they want a carpet. Are those possible accommodations that can be considered when you're doing intake?
Absolutely. I mean, we would assess any request. They're keeping in mind that the building itself may not be the one to bear the cost. I think that something that's not always known or understand with the housing authority is not all of our properties are federally funded, nor are they owned by the city of Salem. They're actual partnership agreements with an investment partner. And so we also have to run those as a business on behalf of the investment partner, taking into consideration like Sequoia Crossings. We have both Banner Bank and Enterprise Investment Partners on there. So we have to account and adhere to them on all operational expenses. There are various different requirements in the unit that you were in. I'm guessing you were in, just from what you're experiencing, probably had tile.
No, it was laminate.
Was it laminate?
Yeah.
Okay, so through the years, there was a period of time that HUD didn't allow any housing authorities to put any carpet anywhere in any of the units, and it had to be old military block style tile. We actually since went and put carpet in many of those units when they loosened those up, and then we've had requests to remove those. We've even removed those. It kind of goes back and forth. We've had residents at Parkway who have been wheelchair bound, who the carpet was actually creating a hindrance for their mobility in the apartment. So we worked with them on not only the carpeting, but also the shower, everything. We're always going to see what we can do to try to assist and what that cost is. The accommodations, the landlord can bear the cost if it's a reasonable cost. Now, if it's $100,000 expense, then that may not be considered reasonable, but we would talk about what other options there are. That may be being on a waiting list for the next available unit that meets that need, or it may be that in cases where we can give a voucher, we would give a voucher so they could find a unit that meets their needs out in the community. And then we also have a landlord navigator that works with many of our clients to seek out that information.
Okay.
But there's been many times we've done where we've taken carpet in, we've taken tile, we've put tile in. It kind of goes both ways. And we understand that, especially with the acoustics, we've Parkway and Sequoia are very close to the Oregon School for the Deaf. And so we've had many of our residents who are also members of that school or teach at that school who have taught us a lot through the years. And we've made additional accommodations as requested. Every unit may not be outfitted with all of these accommodations because it is very cost prohibitive in construction. But we have gone through and we've completely outfitted many of the units with the things that you're asking. The key fob system is not something you can just put on one single unit. We would be probably looking to something more of a coded entry or something similar, but not a key fob. Key fobs are actually run off of a software in a computer system. They actually require very expensive software to program that and keep it going. And it would be difficult for us to have one unit with just a key fob.
That actually might be something to explore because I actually have one in my house. It's a single doorknob key fob. I use it for my office to make sure my kids stay out of it. But and then my wife has access to it as well. Then there's also the option of, like you said, a keypad But if you're not able to recall the numbers, obviously someone's going to be calling you to get access to their unit. There are other type of, I guess, so key fob might be the correct word, but a digital entry that can be done through even your cell phone now. And to where you can just touch your cell phone to it and it opens. Or
Actually,
having,
Most of the new, even numerical locks have that option for your phone.
correct.
Yeah.
But then there's also the device that you can just literally put on your keychain and it creates the same signal that will unlock the door as well. So there are various options to doing that. And the reason why I recommend it is because of cognitive fatigue.
Mhm.
And I mean, obviously, if I drove home, I'm going to have my keys with me. But there have been times where I've locked my keys out of the house. I have forgotten information or forgotten details, like even a security code that I've used 100 times. And so that's just something where I strongly recommend based on the individual need. But where I would come in when it comes to accommodations like those is my recommendation would be to have different options available
Mhm.
in a storage unit as backups, whatever that might be. But also the process of going through a medical release and medical proof of that information. When you're going through that process as an individual, it's difficult because it's like, okay, I'm obviously in need of housing.
Mhm.
I'm in this situation. And now you want me to disclose and prove that I'm disabled in whatever. And it's not a legal disclosure, but it's still I'm now required to prove to you that I have a mental illness by giving you doctor reports and so forth.
It actually doesn't, we actually don't want to know any specific diagnoses. So the form, and I'd be happy to share it, email it out to everybody. It doesn't indicate, we actually prefer that none of that. And we actually redact it off many of the forms if it is disclosed on them and before we ever put them in the file.
But at times that form in general is putting the burden on the person to go to their doctor, to get everything filled out, to bring that back to you. And that alone is a form of disclosure.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Any other questions for Nicole?
And I would be happy to be on some form that goes, but that could probably be what they would consider sometimes an act of Congress for us to change, or maybe that's something to bring up with Oregon Housing and Community Services, because it's not just SHA that's required of this. It's all of the affordable housing complexes in Oregon. And anybody who has, they're wanting to see some form of that being a policy or a procedure for that we're treating everybody the same. So we're not treating anyone different. This is kind of the way that we're keeping it consistent for everybody. I will tell you that if we see somebody that is obviously wheelchair bound that needs some sort of mobility feature, we do not require that they go to the doctor. We take care of that immediately.
Thank you. Any other questions for Nicole? I have a few questions for you, Nicole, if you don't mind. So I was trying to keep track of, you covered a lot of ground in your opening comments. I think one of the first things that you mentioned was the weight of the doors, which as you rightly pointed out, is something that we had heard feedback about. And you mentioned, of course, fire safety, the 5-pound minimum for to seal the door frame and to create pressure to combat spread of fire in the event of a fire. I don't know if what I heard from folks was that the weight of the door in and of itself was problematic. It was needing to use their arms or whatever, or being unable to open the door. And so I was wondering if, to what extent the housing authority had thought about simple, like recessed ADA door openers. I mean, ones that so you could open the door with a key and open it manually should you wish, but if you couldn't and you could open it, you can lock it with a key and then press a button and have the door open. That's standard practice in a lot of places. Why is that not something that well, maybe it is. Is that something the housing authority does on a regular basis?
Talking standard practice in apartments, because that is not a standard practice for apartments to have a push button, open, closed door. That is for front entry doors. We have them on all of our office doors. Many of the entrance doors to the properties that have common hallways, we do have the automatic openers that are on those. Unfortunately, those are probably one of the most heavily damaged items in our property because people get frustrated with them and hit them and punch them, which is really unfortunate for the individuals who need that, because we replace them quite frequently.
Thank you. So if I missed, so I think your answer to the question is that it's not something that you've considered at the housing authority to do for residences.
For all, say that at like Sequoia Crossings, there's 60 apartments there. Would be asking that we put those automatic door openers on all doors?
No, no. I think one of the recommendations that we heard was having them on like first floor apartments, for example.
I don't know that we've specifically brought, I mean, certainly on your list of items, we've gone now through and I've actually sent it out to the architects to get their feedback. And there is a cost associated with that. And I understand the importance and we can definitely look into it in the future. But these are very challenging usually to keep operationally in line and keep it affordable for us to help all of the residents that live there and be able to continue to make our mortgage payments on the buildings as well. So we have usually a set amount that we need to make, be able to stay within. I often have many items that are value engineered and I try to include as much of them back into the package as we can. And this is certainly one that we can approach in the future, but I actually haven't had anybody request that specifically for their apartment.
Yeah, I asked because I went to a college where every door was engineered that way. It was every door to classrooms and administrative offices, but also most new buildings for apartments were also engineered with that. And it was, as a wheelchair user, it was really helpful to me.
Have it.
Yeah. Excuse me?
We do in the common spaces. So yes, the community room didn't have it. The community room was also designed to be an open air space too. And I understand that our services team isn't necessarily always opening the doors, but the doors can be open and remained open. But we did put it on the laundry room and in the front entrance to the service entrance to the building. I think where we probably went wrong with that is that we probably anticipated individuals coming through the front door and didn't consider individuals necessarily coming through the back doors as frequently. So we are currently working on having a request for proposal to add one to that specific community room. Because we do, like you said, have them on almost every interest of all of our common spaces.
Yeah. And thank you for having that RFP. I think that'll be a great addition to the community space. My next question was about keeping to the accessibility of the units. You mentioned having 3 fully accessible units at Sequoia Crossing. First, could you help me understand what you mean by fully accessible? And then why 3? How did the Housing Authority arrive at that number?
3 are full ADA, where they meet all ADA requirements. That means turning radiuses, cabinets are designed so that wheelchairs can go under them. The countertops are at a certain height. Light switches are placed in accessible locations. Instead of different appliances are used. Oftentimes those are side-by-sides instead of the standard refrigerators. The controls to the ranges, it's a lower height range. They're in the front. Our bathroom circumferences have a complete turnaround radius. There's grab bars throughout. in various different properties. Those are completely wheel-in shower accessible bathrooms. It just depends from property to property. But every
you.
aspect meets then the ADA requirement.
And as to the number, the three meeting all those requirements, how did you arrive at that? How many? Well, I guess first of all, how many first floor apartments are there at Sequoia Crossings?
A good question that you asked me a year ago. I could tell you off my head, but let's see.
But many more than three is my
It's
understanding.
20. It's
20.
20.
Okay. So even if it's less or if it's more than 20, it's many more than three. So I guess my second question was, how did SHA arrive at that number, having three of the apartments?
Honestly, required by law, there has to be the 3 apartments in the
Yeah.
building. I will tell you that we have struggled through the years to fill fully ADA apartments. And so some of the comments you'll see when we did the design of Sequoia Crossings, we took into effect what our demographics on our waiting list and the need in the community. And that was where we landed with that being visitable and on the remaining units, and then the 3 ADA required. If we do not find somebody that needs the features of an ADA apartment, that apartment could sit empty, or we would have to require somebody moving into that apartment without the need for the features to sign an agreement that at any time they would have to move from that apartment when the need is available. That puts in level of trauma and stress and anxiety onto individuals when they have to move into that as the only way to accept an apartment. And so we have much more need for the visibility of the apartment and adding additional mobility or hearing or sight features into the other ones. And so that is why we chose to go with the required by law amount.
And do you find, Nicole, that there's a lot of folks with mobility needs that maybe aren't getting their needs met because they are being moved into units that they don't feel are fully accessible for them, or live on a non-first floor room? In your experience, does that happen?
Well, let me talk a little bit about the process to get to our buildings. This
That'd be
is
great.
I've been extremely vocal about in our community about the coordinated entry system. And Sequoia Crossings, Uquina Hall, they are referral with a preference from our sheltering locations. And we've run into an unfortunate situation where we've heard on occasion that people were advised that they couldn't remain at a shelter unless they took whatever was available at one of our sites. That is not our goal at the Housing Authority. Our goal is to work with individuals to help provide them the stability, the comfort that they need to be able to stabilize coming out of homelessness. And we are working to help be part of the solution in finding ways to better train and have understanding with sheltering staff or even coordinated entry assessors, but the coordinated entry assessment doesn't always capture everything that's needed to make sure that an individual is being referred to the right or correct placement. And we understand that. And many people who've been through years and years of trauma will accept whatever, and often we won't know until after they've moved in that they actually need more help with activities of daily living, or they need to be moved from us probably should never have gone to a second or third floor. We do try to work with them to find an available apartment, but in cases where Sequoia is so new and opening, it's been open just over a year. We're headed into our second year here very soon. But apartments don't frequently turn over at locations that are that new. So it's hard to have availability to move people around at that point.
That's really helpful. Can you if you don't mind, maybe talk a bit more about that that maybe that I for lack of a better term, that mismatching that may happen sometimes where folks who have, say, mobility needs, their needs aren't known to you until they're already moving in. That seems that seems odd to me. I mean, talk to me about how that happens and any solutions that you all have tried to outfit for that problem.
So, I don't have all the answers for that. It is something we've identified as, something that, of a challenge. One of my goals, anytime I'm involved with the design of a building and we open it up, my, philosophy has to be at that building for 90 to 120 days after it opens so that I can visualize what happens, what we need to improve, what's working and what's not working at the building so that I can have a really good understanding of what's helping our community and what needs to be improved upon. The one thing that I noticed at Sequoia Crossings is that we were getting an abundance, and please understand, as a landlord, our job also is to comply with fair housing. So we don't always, we can't ask these questions of individuals that maybe sheltering providers or coordinated entry assessors can ask. We receive the referrals, we take that information and process it as any individual would on the waiting list. And then if they qualify for the apartment, then based off of income and them accepting it, we move them into the apartment. Unless somebody tells us otherwise, we have no way to know. And so what we are finding was there wasn't really good soft handoffs from our many of the referral entities that were working case management at sheltering locations into our case management at Sequoia. Oftentimes there was basically a line drawn. They were placed into Sequoia. There was no additional follow-up. There wasn't really good communication. Many things have changed probably since the initial opening of that building. And I have been speaking at many events explaining that even the coordinated entry, I questioned how some of the individuals qualified for Sequoia Crossings. You're supposed to read a vulnerability assessment for PSH level. And sometimes we weren't even clear how that was occurring. So there is what we have identified is that also that individuals we're often being referred to almost as like this is the only option and they need to go here. There was no clear, what we would like to say, rigid definitions of being ready for housing, or there was no soft assessments of being able to have the client have choice. It's often limited or ignored because they wanted them to take the next step into permanency of housing. And so one of my bigger concerns is that often mental health, substance abuse, other legal issues may not have been fully considered in whether this is the correct placement. We were also seeing vulnerability assessments, but individuals may not be ready for independent living. And maybe they needed some additional transition time or location that would have better set them up for success. We're really trying to have shelters take a different approach to just not going off of what a coordinated entry assessment, but spending the time and really defining what the individual needs and what the individual wants, and not just that they just have to go here because this is the only option. And because unfortunately that often ends up in setting individuals up for failure. And that is not our mission at the Salem Housing Authority.
Thank you. That was really revealing to me because, I'll say, as a member of the public, I would expect that the housing authority would be much more involved in placing people, and I think it's an important thing to understand that that's maybe not the case. And I think that for those of us who were at that listening session at Sequoia Crossing, one of the biggest things that was a takeaway for us, and I will speak for us, I think, because we all talked about it afterwards, was that people seemed, many people felt, and made it clear to us that they felt overwhelmed by the number of resources available to them, and then burdened by the lack of continuity of those resources. So there are maybe 5 or 6 or 7 different information streams that each did different things, but no one was addressing the whole person and their whole needs. And when contact was made by those providers, it was made once or twice and never again, or it was handed off to someone else. And there were, I would say, a majority of people who came out to speak to us, and there were several, maybe a dozen or so, who did, said some variation of that. And there was, I think, certainly from a couple, a sense of feeling trapped there, and not being able to succeed, to your point. And so I don't know. I think it's a continued conversation, but I think we are as a body interested in finding ways to negotiate that, and we're obviously newcomers to this conversation that's been ongoing for some time. But it would be, I think, valuable to continue to think through how to better that, to streamline that and to make it more effective for folks who need it. So I appreciate that context, Nicole. Um,
And
my last question. No, go ahead, please.
we have taken steps. We witnessed this occur at Sequoia. It was heartbreaking and frustrating for us to witness much of what we did see of individuals who struggled tremendously. Many individuals were told a different variation, or maybe what they thought the variation of permanent supportive housing is. The assessment of housing readiness needs to be there as well. When we're making decisions for referral for permanent supportive housing. We've had individuals that were not even ready to walk through the door or begin housing stability come as referrals to properties. Individuals that have camped on our property for multiple weeks attempting to get them into their unit. When clearly there's many that are at a different level of readiness, waiting in shelters. And we need to really capture people's readiness for housing and not make decisions for them. And that's very imperative for the buy-in of the individual to want to succeed in these programs, and also be a part of their plan in engagement and understanding. But we also have seen that there is a need for occupational therapy, and we have partnered with Western Oregon University and brought them on site, because occupational therapy is probably one of the key components that we're seeing is needed to help people stabilize back and integrate back into buildings. That is a gap in the society of sheltering and homelessness that is not being met. And so thankfully, Western Oregon's new program is here in Salem. And they have been working with us for over the last year, even before Sequoia opened, to start up this exciting program when their first school year happened this year. So come this school year, we're now going to have those students on site at both Yakunna and Sequoia.
That's great. Thank you, Nicole. Just to clarify, so what role could Salem Housing Authority have in this referral process? It sounds like maybe very limited or no role. Because I think I heard you describe yourself as, rightly, a property owner. You're a landlord, and I'm sure bound by federal law, not being able to provide preferential treatment. But is there any role that SHA could play in placing people that you can think of? Maybe you're not doing it now, but would like to be able to do, or is it really just the onus belongs on other people?
Well, I mean, that we need to be a partner at the table, and we need to be an educator. And that is one thing that we are out there doing. I can say that Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency, ARCHES, has been at the table with me and trying to figure out the next step and solution to how to address some of these scenarios and what can we change and what can we do better. Every time we open a building, we learn something new and learn something different, but it's gotten to the level where I'm at the table trying to educate others of this gap in the community and why there's a lot of people that often think that the housing authority is the one that's picking and choosing who goes where and when, but that's a referral base. And we are not the ones going to ever be there picking and choosing at shelters who comes to our buildings. That would not, we expected that ability to happen at the sheltering levels in proper assessments that are being completed there with the staffing and the funding that's received to ensure that individuals are being made to the correct referral. And we understand that people often move in and sometimes we're helping to navigate to the next or a different level of care that may be needed. But there's an education component to what permanent supportive housing is. It's not there to provide everything for every individual. We did supply move-in packages, pots and pans to get people started. But then after about 90 to 120 days, what we were also seeing is that individuals were expecting that we supplied all cleaning supplies, all toilet paper, everything to keep and maintain apartments ongoing. We do accept that we can help and support, but we cannot also supply everything for 60 units full term. And that's not the design of permanent supportive housing. It's there to help engage individuals in trying to figure out where those gaps are in their life so that we can help bridge that gap. But not necessarily that the building or the owner itself is the one that's supporting all 60 units in the building. We do supply immediate needs to keep individuals going over difficult times, but that doesn't mean that we supply this ongoing. We did find that was an education component that wasn't maybe being misinformed to individuals that were coming to our buildings and moving in on what their expectations of permanent supportive housing was also. So I think there's still a very large education component. And like I said, I am working with the housing supportive teams that are at our 3 locations, and we are dedicated to get out there and make sure that our referral partners understand. One of our goals, and we are working with Oregon Housing and Community Services for funding for Uquina Hall, but one of our goals is to also have a navigator that is designated to our supportive services team that is also out there in the shelters and navigating and communicating and making sure those soft handoffs happen.
Thank you, Nicole. I really appreciate your time and your comments and the background that you provided us. I think it is helpful for this next portion of our meeting. I have other questions for you, Nicole, but I'm sensitive to the time that we have tonight and to your time tonight too. So once again, I just really want to appreciate you, and hopefully we'll be able to continue the conversation. This is a temporary body. It may become permanent, it may not, but either way, more work ahead of us. Are there any other final questions for Nicole tonight from anyone else?
Yeah, this is Christina. I have a follow-up to what you were just talking about. Are the people making the referrals, do you think inappropriate referrals are made because they lack the knowledge or because they're overwhelmed?
I think it's twofold.
Okay.
One thing I've heard is staffing turnover is high. That individuals, because the staffing turnover is high, that also comes with a component of not having appropriate training, maybe not having appropriate coordinated entry assessment training. But then in reality, does coordinated entry assessment, is that really the only tool that we should be also communicating with the individuals? Because it doesn't really necessarily decide if a person needs additional mobility help, whether the person needs help with activities of daily living. The one thing that we've also communicated is that there are many individuals that need more care, like in-home care, once they arrive into their apartment. And that should be started, that coordination in the sheltering process before they're actually into the apartment, because it's about a 6 to 8 week turnover for that entire process. Takes entirely too long when individuals are suffering and they need that in-home care help to keep going by day. And so we have been at the table asking for changes to that. One of the very shocking things that I learned is that if an individual is in shelter, they weren't being assessed for in-home care or additional care because they weren't technically housed. And that to me was extremely bothersome, because it is a very long and difficult process to get the additional care. And can this be a component that can be added um, for individuals to help get the assistance to maybe shower at a shower truck, or maybe shower at a sheltering location, or provide certain amount of assistance that maybe could help them get showered, but because technically they were not housed, unless that's changed. I've tried to bring some light that that assessment needs to happen then, so that this care can follow through into into the apartments, because once they arrive and they have no ability, we're continually calling fire trucks. We're supposed to be providing harm reduction, when in reality, we're then placing multiple calls and additional calls to locations because they're not receiving the right level of care that's needed for them.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And thank you again, Nicole. I am going to transition this over to our next portion of the conversation. We only have a half an hour left, but thank you so much, Nicole, and I look forward to having you either back or in some other capacity to continue the conversation. So thank you.
For having me tonight. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, I think the next portion is obviously kind of sifting through the recommendations that Chloe so deftly collated for this body, and I saw already that Dan and Christina and Tony and folks have been engaging with the material and Haley too online. So in terms of some email comments, I just wanted to say I appreciate people's enthusiasm about it. We probably, just as a reminder, not to have serial emails with all members online, because that can put us in violation of public meeting laws. So I appreciate all the commentary, and then let's make sure to bring it up again here in person so that we can clarify those things publicly and for the record, and continue on with the conversation in this capacity. So here we are in November. We're looking at a December or a January in time for these recommendations. We can go through some of the recommendations as Chloe has presented them, or we can just summarize our thoughts or open reactions. I'll leave the floor open for folks to jump in here, give any reactions, comments, concerns. The full document is pretty extensive, but it's boiled down to, I think it was 5 recommendation areas. So would it be helpful to maybe view it online altogether, or do folks have access to the recommendations on their own? Um, on their own. I'm sort of biased to maybe sharing the screen. If someone can facilitate that, I can do it for that matter, but just so that people at home can also see what we're talking about when we're talking about it. Um, does that feel good to folks? Oh, great. Thank you, Chris, for doing that. I was gonna volunteer, but that's great. All right, so we're looking here at Dan's recommendations, but could we look at the ones that Chloe provided as well?
You able to see that? Uh,
I can see Dan's supplemental, which is great, and I want to get to that, but I think we probably should start with the ones that Chloe put together if possible.
Let me change what I'm sharing.
Great. Okay. So this, as a reminder to the folks, this is a very preliminary. Chloe's done us a huge favor, and I really want to appreciate her for that. This is very preliminary, so obviously your recommendations, some of which you've already provided, are welcome, and we'll beef this up, so to speak. We'll add muscle to it and add examples and specificity about numbers and sessions and things like that. But this is just a starting point, and we want to thank Chloe for that. So. Do you want to go down to the recommendation areas? I think it starts later down on the page here. So yeah, so we have housing authority, public spaces, community engagement, accessibility goals, pedestrian accessibility. Um, okay.
I do.
People that are walking.
Could
So
you go,
who said what? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
sorry. I wrote it down. Could you go to 4.1? Yes, please. Thank you.
Was that Christina? Yeah, 4.1 is fine. It's a yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that I heard from more than a couple people at the listening sessions was that pedestrian crossings aren't really that safe. And I've noticed myself when I'm driving around, I've been noticing a lot of folks are not paying a lot of attention. And so I'm hoping that what we could add to this is a couple things. One would be for intersections that have a lot of disabled or unsheltered traffic, pedestrian traffic, that we have flags or flashing lights at those intersections. I know other municipalities have flags that are stored in the crosswalk sign. You take the flag and you take it across with you. That would be helpful for folks in wheelchairs, especially considering the tendency of Americans now to buy bigger and bigger vehicles all the time. You cannot always see somebody in a wheelchair from your large vehicle when they're crossing at a crosswalk. I'm also thinking some of those crosswalks might benefit from the yellow flashing lights that we have at some other, I haven't seen them at crosswalks, but at other corner crosswalks. I've seen them in places where there is a pedestrian crossing and they hit the light and the yellow flashes, letting traffic know that there's a pedestrian crossing. And I was thinking that in those high traffic areas, those would be helpful. And what I've heard from folks is that especially when people are making left-hand turns, that they're not as careful as they should be. And I know that I was actually guilty of that myself a couple months ago on my way home. I was making a left-hand turn and I did almost hit somebody in the crosswalk. So I think if we could add maybe some public education on being more careful when making left-hand turns. And then just trying to raise visibility somehow at those high those high trafficked areas where we know there's a lot of pedestrian crossing that happen to be folks living with disabilities.
Okay, thank you. Great conversation starter here, Christina. Tony, go ahead. I see your hand raised.
Hi. I agree with Christina and, like when I first moved into Sequoia Crossings, not having a car, Fred Meyer is my closest grocery store. But just navigating from the intersection to the grocery store, there is no defined walking, for a pedestrian. And when I moved in, and I moved in February of 24. I went into Fred Meyer and I went to their customer service center and I said, they've just opened this apartment complex. It's, people who have come, from unhoused situations, a lot of disabled people, and you're the primary source of groceries. But navigating your parking lot, over on the side where they put in the gas station, everything over there is great. It's all brand new and they've, used paint to mark where pedestrians can walk to get from like the gas station to the store. They did finally repaint the lines about 2 months ago to better mark where the cars should go because there is supposed to be a stop there and the cars have not been stopping. So yeah, back to my thought is a lot of problems have to do with kind of laziness by drivers. And is there some way we could talk to the Salem Police Department about maybe doing a, pedestrian safety month or something? And, maybe they concentrate on paying attention to moving violations that put pedestrians in danger. Because from my personal experience walking around this city for 2 years, um, my dog and I have been hit and they just take off. So, I don't know if we could add something like that into our recommendations that we ask that the police department maybe look into focusing on pedestrian safety for, and maybe issue some violations to remind people, about pedestrian safety as a driver. I'm spitballing at this point, but anyway, my thoughts.
Yeah, another area where we could beef up the awareness of pedestrians is where we know there might be a large senior population who might be more likely to use walkers. It takes them longer to get across the crosswalks, and sometimes they don't make it within the time the lights allow. I had heard that from a few people at listening sessions, and that's not something we can't do anything about. That's a Department of Transportation thing with the timing of the lights. So we can't impact that, but maybe we can just raise awareness at places where we know there are folks that are more at risk to potentially being hit.
This is Robert here. I do want to just call out that reducing fatalities and injury collisions, a lot of this traffic stuff that we're talking about is actually listed as Initiative 2 in the Salem Police Department's strategic plan. They shared it at council last month, but it is definitely one of the things that's on their radar. I do also just want to call out that one of the recent things the city of Salem's done to help with this, especially with the left-hand turns into crosswalks, is you'll notice it partially downtown and in some other areas of town that the pedestrian light signals will actually trigger before the green lights come on to allow pedestrians to get into the crosswalks before the lights turn to help drivers identify those pedestrians that are in those marked crosswalks before they begin making their turn. But I did just want to point out that the Salem Police Department is also sharing this. At least they've identified it in their strategic plan.
Robert, you mentioned something that I was going to bring up, which is that change that happened. I think it was maybe in the last year or two, not longer than that, of adding 3 seconds for pedestrians to get out into the road, which has been, I think, super helpful. And obviously, pedestrian safety and biker safety are some of our worst areas in terms of public safety here in Salem. We have a lot of pedestrian and bike and vehicular fatalities in Salem. It's an enormous problem. So I think these are on the nose as things that are really important for us to be thinking about. I also would mention that I think another big part of this puzzle is braiding into the work of the Planning Commission, which is going to be updating the transportation system plan in the next couple of years, the TSP, which is really going to be taking a look at our built environment and the rules around that. So, should we really have to line streets, for example, which we know changes driver behavior and makes folks drive faster in residential neighborhoods? Do streets have to be so wide? People also drive faster when streets are so wide. These are sort of things that I think are also top of mind for folks on the planning side. And Eunice could probably speak more intelligently than I could to that, but I think it'd be important to be able to incorporate TSP stuff in this section as well. Any other comments or reactions to Christina's comments before we move over to Dan's list?
I do have one more thing. Parking for wheelchair vans. The suggestion that I heard, and maybe I'm not, I think I have it right. Because the slope of the streets here for water drainage, when individuals use handicap spaces, that their ramp comes down on the side of that slope, sometimes they cannot exit or enter their vehicle. So the suggestion was to put the handicap spaces, if it's a one-way street, on the left-hand side of the street. Am I remembering that correctly, Chloe? Yes, she's on the left-hand side of the street because most of the ramps come off the passenger side of a vehicle. And then the ramp wouldn't be going down into the slope. Am I making sense?
Mhm.
Okay. But that's on one-way streets. I don't know what to do about that slope in other circumstances, because you're kind of defeating the whole purpose of having a wheelchair accessible space if the ramp is going into a slope. So those spaces really aren't wheelchair accessible.
Right. Any reactions to Christina's point about parking? And remember, we're keeping an eye for things that are, within the city's power to recommend, or within its immediate scope of work in terms of partnerships it can have with other public or private or NGO entities. And so everything we've talked about so far, and I think most of the things on Chloe's list fall within that scope. So I'm appreciative of that. Any other comments or reactions to Chloe's document? I keep calling it Chloe's document. I don't want to put all that on Chloe, but the document that was produced. Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
Well, I for one would like to thank Chloe for this wonderful document, and it's so well organized and put together. and thank her for all of her work showing up at listening sessions, even when we got the date wrong. Sorry about that. But she's just been a tremendous help as this work built up. And I just really felt like when she came along, it was like we got an angel to come help when we really got down to the nuts and bolts of the work. And I want to thank her very much for everything that she's done for us.
I second that.
Very appreciated. Thank you, Tony, for saying so. Dan, do you want to spend a few minutes talking about your comments and reactions with the group?
I do. So I did send in a full consideration of recommendations, but I'll kind of give the basics going around that. Kind of what we've already heard in the kind of adopting universal design and training city staff. Those are two things that consistently come up. And one was acknowledging, clarifying what ADA is. And we hear ADA accessibility, ADA accessible units. But then we see that those are very narrow to physical disabilities. And even though physical disability is being very important, there's still not a consideration for accessibility in general, instead of going off of the ADA guidelines. I know we did kind of speak a lot about that with the ADA official themselves. Adopting universal design, kind of like even with the streetlights or with whenever there's a new build construction. I think any of those moments, there should be a consideration with disability needs. If we're going to be spending money to replace a streetlight, we could take that consideration into effect of some type of universal design to at least consult on what are the updated information rather than just we're going to use the same procedures as we did 5 years ago. And I think that could go into anything, into building new parks, and taking that consultation as a step-by-step on any new construction. Like I said, training city staff and volunteers, especially when it comes to neurodiversity or sensory needs and trauma-informed communication. Prioritizing disability access in housing and shelter programs. And that was one kind of I had experience as well, to where when going through a housing program, I did notice that, and we kind of talked about the prioritizing like a waiting list for somebody with a special need, needing a special resource that's outside of ADA. And then I kind of go over a little bit of the countrywide accessibility guide. We did talk about that a little bit, but I noticed that was not in the initial resource. We talked about having some type of guide to allow people to find resources in a one-stop shop, or having an ally that could support them through an entire process of that resource. And I did mention even here in this type of meeting itself, having some type of language guide for the environment that you're in. So myself coming into a more political environment without a political background, there was a lot of terms that I did not understand coming into here. And I will say those were very intimidating. So coming into an environment or going into the housing authority and not understanding the language of the environment can be a very serious barrier. And the other thing I kind of wanted to highlight that I didn't really see on there was on-site support. And that comes to kind of what we were talking about as well, with that one point person to walk you through a process. But when somebody comes in and they're obviously in a wheelchair, or they're non-speaking, or even if they have their native language or their primary language is not English, those resources are provided to them readily. People will open a door for you. People will have a translator available for you. But on request, having an on-site support for other disabilities as well. And I'm more focused on cognitive disabilities, to where if somebody is asking for a language guide, they're asking for a list of acronyms, or they're asking for some support because they're going to be bringing a special needs child with them, that they want to participate, but without that added support, they're not going to be able to. And then representation and trust building, I do strongly believe that unless we implement things first, we will not be able to see the inclusion. And one particular point I kind of made and seen was I went to the Salem Art Festival, and we were told, okay, do we need to support people with PTSD at the Salem Art Festival? And people were like, no, people with these PTSD don't come to the Salem Art Festival. But the reason they don't come is because there's no support. If you had the support, would they come? That's the challenge. So building the support first is definitely something that's going to be needed. I can yield there and take any questions.
Thank you, Dan. One thing you didn't mention just now, but you did mention in the email, which Chloe is aware of, and the committee is aware of, is having implementation timelines for these recommendations. What is achievable or actionable in 6 months, or immediately 6 to 12 months, 12 months to a year, or 5 years from now. So those we hope to have those as well. As these recommendations mature. But thank you, Dan, for those additional comments. Are there any questions for Dan?
I want to add to that. I know one of our purposes here was to come up with a plan of the short, medium, long-term type of
Yeah.
projects and recommendations. So yes, I did include that within my emails, and then I think everybody has access to that.
Well, if there aren't any questions for Dan, are there any other comments or reactions? Recognizing that our next meeting of this task force is December 1, which is a month from now, and then the Human Rights Commission, who ostensibly will be hearing the recommendations first, meets 2 days later on Wednesday, December 3rd. So we're going to have a whole other hour and a half. I don't at this time anticipate having guests on that December 1st meeting of this task force, but so it's okay if something else isn't coming to mind now. But I'd like to also walk into that conversation on the 1st of December with a pretty nearly done thing. And so any comments or reactions you have now or in the weeks ahead, please share them. All right. Well, again, if you do have comments and reactions, which I encourage you to have and to share, please email them to Robert, Chris, Chloe, and I. But I will say probably only those of us who I just mentioned, so that we're not veering into public meeting laws. And then we hope to have Chloe's capacity and our capacity permitting a draft of these well in advance of our next meeting, so that we can kind of have those continued conversations in the weeks ahead. I really want to appreciate Chloe for her energy and time. She endured a part of an afternoon with Robert and I a few weeks ago, and I appreciate her for that, even though both of us were late to that. So sorry for that. But appreciate her and Chris and Gretchen's time, of course, there too, as we wade our way through recommendations. There's a lot to process here, a lot of things to recommend, and my hope is that the product is as encompassing of those things and as actionable as it can be, given the nature of this task force and the recommendations. So thank you, Chloe, again, and all of you for participating in our conversation. Are there any closing remarks from anybody they'd like to share tonight before we close out our meeting? Well, hearing none, as we enter this final leg, I just really want to appreciate all the energy that you all have put in. It's been quite a lot. I'm grateful for it, and really looking forward to getting these recommendations put together and have them live on and to really hopefully change people's lives. There's at least two things that we've heard already in this process. One is Eunice's tinkering of figuring out ways to encourage developers and having a list of things for developers to aspire to. I want to have more teeth to that. I want that to be actionable and enforceable and incentivized on the part of the city. But that's a start. We have Nicole talking about RFPs for requests for proposals for doors that should have opened a long time ago and haven't been opening. These are small things, but hopefully demonstrate the impact of this task force already, and we can build on that and help push the conversation to better serve people in Salem. So I really do appreciate all of you so much for your continued time and investment in this process, and look forward to seeing you all on December 1st and having some more recommendations for you at that time. So with that, it's 7:27, and I will bring this meeting of the Civil Rights Task Force to a close, and thank you all for your time and wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you. All right, take care.